Hello, everyone. Here is Everton de Oliveira. I'm here today to interview a very old friend, a great guy, a role model, as I was telling him, because we used to see him as a great researcher doing his job at Waterloo. And it is my great pleasure to bring to you Will Robertson. He put a very nice book that I recommend you to read to learn about that. That's quite important topic. And you get all the important points on a single book. Will is a professor emeritus in the Department of Earth and Environmental Science at the University of Waterloo. And he's focused on physical hydrogeology and geochemistry of contaminated groundwater. Hello, Will.
Everton, hello. Thanks for the introduction. Very nice.
No, you are a great guy. You are a great guy. So, Will, since I know you, and that's a long time already, you've been quietly producing great work. Tell us a little bit about your career, how you became a hydrogeologist, and how at Waterloo.
I'll tell you one little interesting story to start off on how I came to Waterloo in the first place. When I was in high school in grade 13, I was entertaining several universities to go to, either in science and engineering. And Waterloo was getting considerable buzz. This was the early 1970s about their computer science expertise at that point. So a number of students from our school were heading to Waterloo. But I was interested in geology. So what I did is I wrote the chairman of the Earth Science Department at Waterloo a letter asking him what the strengths of his department was at that point. And I got a nice letter back explaining that they were expanding their research group at Waterloo in earth science, and they'd hired a bunch of new faculty, and their focus was going to be on groundwater hydrology. And I had no idea who the chairman was at that time, but it was Bob Farbold. So largely on the strength of that letter, that's how I ended up in Waterloo.
Oh, that's very so. You were convinced by Bob Farbold himself.
Yes, and I just wish I'd kept a copy of that letter.
That would be great. That would be great. He was a great guy, great human being, really. Yes.
Yeah, he was.
Very good. So, and that's how you became a hydrogeologist. So you started geology.
Well, originally it was just I was interested in rocks, so I just went into the straight geology program as an undergrad. But then at the end, when I was considering grad school, all those big guns in the department, Farbold, Cherry, Gillum, and Friend, they were all just reaching their stride at that point, and they were attracting all the grad student attention. Plus, I'd already taken courses from all of them as an undergrad, so I was quite happy to go down that road with those guys. So I ended up.
Eric Reardon was there at that time as well.
Eric Reardon, oh yeah, he was another strong part of that team for sure. Yeah, and
that's very good. That's very good. So how septic tanks came into play in your research life? I mean, because everybody else at Waterloo, most of them were doing organics, human-made contaminants at Waterloo, and apparently, septic tanks were not fancy for research, and you're there doing this nice work. How that happened?
Yeah, well, that's another interesting story too. It started with a collaboration between John Cherry and the Procter and Gamble company. They were interested in finding a site where they could establish whether or not their laundry detergents were biodegrading in septic systems. So we got a collaborative grant with Procter and Gamble, and I got involved with that. So I ended up finding two field sites, septic system sites, the Cambridge and the Muskoka sites, in that the first year or two, and that's when we started out with our septic system research.
Okay,
based on that collaboration.
You started in Cambridge, yeah. Okay.
Cambridge, yeah.
So, but you started using field sites with the contamination already in place then?
No, so we just one of the sites, the Muskoka site, was a grad student's parents, Bernie Cooper, as a matter of fact, who basically volunteered his his parents' house on the Soka River as we thought it was going to be a good field site, and his parents were very accommodating for us to go in there and install our instrumentation, and they were very enthusiastic about the research. And the same with the group at Cambridge. It was a research farm operated by the University of Guelph. And so again, they were quite enthusiastic and supportive of us going to that site to do a septic system plume study.
Oh, that's interesting. So Bernie Cooper was there. Bernie came to Brazil quite a few times. So I met him here. I invited him for events. He's a great guy too. Yeah.
Yeah, he made a great contribution while offering up his parents' field site. It was a good one.
That's very good. So septic tanks are the most common source for groundwater contamination, and yet it's seen as a safe practice for, by many technical and lay people alike. Why is that? And what are the major concerns from this practice?
Yeah, like my view is that people have a general misconception about septic systems, that they're vulnerable to groundwater contamination. So basically, people think that, okay, if we can dispose of our wastewater like in a sewage treatment plant, then it all goes away, it's dealt with, and leaving it on site is leaving a potential problem. But I don't necessarily agree with that viewpoint. In fact, in some cases, it can be just the opposite. And so basically, part of the objective of this book is perhaps turn people's opinion about the utility and the advantages of using septic systems for wastewater treatment.
Yeah, and how does a contamination plume form? Because you have sometimes the septic tanks are fine. Sometimes you develop an important plume. How does they form?
Basically, the plume forms from the infiltration bed, the drain field where the wastewater is infiltrated, migrates downwards through the vadose zone, and then forms a plume when it hits the water table, usually in the shallow water table zone, flowing horizontally. And so a lot of the treatment occurs within the vadose zone, within the drain field. So the oxidation of the wastewater can be quite thorough in that zone. And phosphorus removal can be very dramatic. Nitrogen, not so much, but treatment of pathogens is usually pretty good in that vadose zone below the drain field. So the plume that forms in the shallow groundwater zone, it's distinctive from the background groundwater because the chemistry of that wastewater is much different than the surrounding recharge water in most cases, but it's not necessarily highly contaminated. Compared with pathogens, particularly, there's usually not a severe risk from bacteria and viruses in most septic systems. And phosphorus, pretty good. Nitrogen is a little bit of a different story, but again, you need to make that comparison. What's going to happen if it goes to a sewage treatment plant?
Yeah, well, the first problem that comes to mind is viruses and bacteria. How are they removed from the environment using a septic tank? And and if they are not removed, why are they not removed? And another question is that everybody asks is, how far could they travel from the point source?
Yeah, that's everybody's asking that question. Well, bacteria, like the particle size greater than 1 micron, they can be removed by physical filtration in the drain field sediments. And there's also a surface charge on bacteria and viruses that makes them prone to absorption to the sediment particles. So they get deactivated within very short travel distances in most septic system drain fields.
Yeah, you have, because there's the 100 feet distance that people still rely today that after 100 feet is fine. Is that just story that people tell?
Yeah, no,
True?
that's probably a pretty good rule of thumb. Like in a lot of our plume studies, we've seen that the plume has basically been devoid of any kind of bacteria contamination by the time it hits the water table. So that's like 3 meters of travel distance, and it's completely immobilized. But like there are instances where there is mobility of bacteria and viruses in the septic system plumes, but it's mainly in very high permeability sediment, sand and gravel with high velocities, or where there's high velocities in fractured zones or near pumping high production well screens. That's where they've experienced.
Yeah, well, I know, because this is the same question people mention about cemeteries, about, viruses and bacteria, and it's the same situation, right?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. So you mentioned nitrate and phosphorus, right? How are they removed, if they are? And how far will they travel in the groundwater, those two contaminants?
Okay, I'll discuss phosphorus first. That's the easy one. So actually, phosphorus removal in septic system most septic system drain fields can be quite dramatic, and it's much greater than most people realize. So we've just completed a review of all of our sites that we've studied over the last number of decades, like 24 sites, and phosphorus removal within the drain fields, that's between the infiltration pipes and the water table, is greater than 90% at sites that are on non-calcareous sediments, and about 70% at sites on calcareous sediments. And these are because of mineral precipitation reactions that are promoted by the redox changes in the vadosome. So these secondary P minerals precipitate out on the sand grains, and in some cases, a very large percentage of the total wastewater mass can be stuck right there in the shallow drain field sediments. It doesn't get away.
That's very important. It's very important. Yeah. What about nitrate then?
Yeah, nitrogen is a bit of a different story. The amount of nitrogen removal is not as great in septic systems. And I think in that review study, we calculated an average removal of nitrogen of about 35%. And then there are quite a few septic system plumes that have nitrate above the drinking water limit of 10 milligrams per liter. So that's perhaps one of the biggest concerns to a septic system plumes is nitrate contamination.
Yeah.
And so the nitrogen in the septic tank effluent is all ammonia, and then it gets oxidized to nitrate in the vadosome. So that's what oxidation does there. The treatment there doesn't remove nitrogen, it just changes it from one form to another.
Yes, and that goes to could we improve that by adding, I don't know,
yeah, so there
or some sources of organic carbon or something like that?
Yeah, so there have been all kinds of alternative designs put forward to try and remediate, particularly nitrogen. And one possibility is to add organic carbon in the drain field sediments to act as a carbon source for denitrification. So that works, but it hasn't really gotten off the ground on a large scale yet. And there are treatment modules that can do the same thing. Secondary, after the effluent is oxidized, you can add a carbon source, either methanol or wood chips is one of the ones that's commonly used to promote denitrification. Another reaction that's gotten attention lately is this anammox reaction, and that's when the effluent is not entirely oxidized and there's both nitrate and ammonia present in the effluent. Those two nitrogen compounds can react with the help of the anammox bacteria, and the nitrogen can be converted back to a nitrogen gas.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so it's it's an increasingly important reaction now that people are taking note of. And it's probably just as important as denitrification as in reducing reaction for septic systems.
Would you have an idea of the efficiency of that reaction? Because that's interesting.
Yeah, a little bit, yeah. In this review study, first of all, I'll mention this, it's a reaction that's now being promoted in sewage treatment plants to enhance nitrogen removal, NMOx. So it's getting big attention there. But in our review study of our 20 odd sites, we found that sites that had both nitrogen compounds in the plume, ammonia and nitrate, they had much greater nitrogen removal that averaged like something like 60% versus the much lower percentage in the plumes that were just nitrate only.
Okay,
so
we found some, nitrate in very deep aquifers here in Brazil, and because no source of carbon for to reduce to nitrate gas. So we have found that. So could you tell us a little bit, for someone who's picking your book at the first time, why nitrogen is so important? Mention the blue babe disease and things like that. Why is it so important, nitrogen in as a contaminant?
Yeah, so it's first of all that the nitrogen levels in wastewater average about 40 milligrams per liter. That's about 10 times higher than drinking water limit. If that all gets converted to nitrate, then you can be substantially above the drinking water limit. And those high nitrate levels lead to what's referred to as blue baby syndrome. And that is that nitrate gets converted to nitrite in the gut, and nitrate interferes with hemoglobin uptake of oxygen. So there's a health effect there. And secondly, nitrate supports surface water eutrophication, stimulates algae growth, particularly in marine coastal environments. And so nitrate loading in those environments is a problem. And there's turbidity that develops, and it's smothering the eelgrass beds, and there's all kinds of ecological effects in some of these coastal areas now because of septic system use.
Yes. Well, I'm asking you that because we had here one place in the northeast of Brazil, at the beach, and the city develops over sand dunes, right?
Yeah.
And of course, the wells there, water. Most of the water was produced by wells, because sand dunes produce a lot of water, right? Clean water, but they didn't have sewage collection in the city. And now, the nitrate levels are very high.
Yeah.
We had a very, very thick unsaturated zone.
Yeah.
Maybe 100 meters or so. So that was good for oxidizing, bacteria.
Yes.
But nitrate, no. Right.
Yeah, that's when you get high nitrate numbers with thick beta zones, and you get high oxidation, high level of oxidation of that wastewater. All that in goes to nitrate. Yeah.
Yes, that's a problem, and then it becomes very hard to fix. Maybe using ethanol or something like that, right? Would do.
Yeah, so some of the alternative systems, they use a liquid carbon injection like methanol in a secondary treatment module attached to the septic tank. But so that is one option for remediating nitrate.
Interesting. Okay, but there are today, since we use in a household facility, we use a lot of chemical products. There are more contaminants, potential contaminants about that. Some of them are trace contaminants. So what are they? Do you have something about that on your book?
Yeah, so the one organic chemical that we've looked at a fair bit is are the artificial sweeteners, and for use as tracers, and particularly potassium asulfame. Like it's widely used in a range of calorie reduced food and beverage products. So basically it's everywhere. You don't know it's in those products. So asulfame is now a ubiquitous constituent of almost all wastewater worldwide. And it does not break down easily in sewage treatment plants nor in septic systems. So it persists very, very trace levels, parts per trillion, parts per billion in the septic system plumes. But the value of it is that it's a compound that's more or less entirely unique to domestic wastewater. Therefore, it can serve as a tracer. And that's what we've been basically using it for. It persists in plumes we've got one plume, Long Point, where it's persistent at very high concentrations for like 15 years, like out 200 meters. And
so they don't degrade at all, or
yeah, well, that's a good question. It's probably degradable. There's some evidence now that it is being degraded in sewage treatment plants, and it's possible that there is some degradation in aerobic zones like the vadose zone. But once it's in the groundwater zone, it's quite persistent, and it's like the group at Environment Canada has done a lot of work, and like they see it in regional flow systems that have got trace levels of this asulfame compound.
Like some other, is this what they call it, like emerging contaminants?
Yes, it is. Yes. Like I wouldn't call it a contaminant because the concentrations are so low that they're just a tiny fraction of the concentration you'd be drinking in your Diet Coke anyway.
Okay, so you basically use it as a tracer then? Yeah,
so it's a tracer. Whether or not there are any negative environmental effects associated with it, that's still open to questions. There's still people that are worried about its possible environmental effects.
Yeah, interesting. So some other tracers use isotopes as well as a tracer for septic tanks.
So we've used nitrogen isotopes for sure. So they have isotopic signature that's generally heavier than other nitrate sources from fertilizer in particular. So you can use that differentiation between the isotopic signature to distinguish septic system nitrogen contamination from fertilizer.
Okay.
However, there's always a complication. If the farmer is using manure as well as chemical fertilizers, then that distinction disappears, because the nitrogen from manure is basically the same as a septic system. So you need to know.
But now they're using the euphemistically called biosolids in agriculture as well, right?
Yeah, and so that's going to generate a signature the same as a septic system plume. So you need to consider what the sources are.
Yes, yes. Well, but with so many, well, I'm not sure if so many, but there are lots of problems related to septic tanks. And for some people that are reading the book, interested in the book, it would sound like a scary solution for the environment using septic tanks. Is that true? And how does the book can play a role to clarify this point?
Yeah, like your question, yeah, that underscores the common perception about septic systems that they're scary. However, there's also a misconception that when you send your wastewater off the sewage treatment plant, that all that contamination disappears. And that's not necessarily the case, particularly for nitrogen. Sewage treatment plants do not do a very good job for removing nitrogen. In fact, the standard activated sludge sewage treatment plant only removes about 30% of the nitrogen, similar to septic systems.
It's about the same rate as the tank,
they
right?
do not do that much of a better job for removing nitrogen. And the phosphorus removal that I described before is is equally as good as most septic systems, most sewage treatment plants. Like the treatment standard is generally about 1 milligram per liter for the plant effluent, and that's a number that's hardly ever exceeded in septic system plumes. We have a few cases, but that kind of concentration is not normally seen, and there's a high degree of removal. So my viewpoint is that that perhaps septic systems are the green way to go, pun intended, because they require generally lower capital costs than a communal sewage treatment system, and they use way less energy, orders of magnitude less energy required to treat that wastewater, and they can produce treatment that's on par with communal sewage treatment plants for a number of constituents, phosphorus for sure, probably nitrogen, and pathogens are also, viruses and bacteria are also very well treated in most septic systems. The main qualifier, the main problem with septic systems is, I would say, are failing systems when you have surface breakout from the drain field area, where the effluent does not get down into the subsurface for whatever reason, overloading or impermeable sediments or a plugged drain field. So that's what I would say is the main issue to look out for with septic systems.
Or if you your water caption is too close to the,
and shallow water table can be a problem. However, it can be a benefit too, because that promotes incomplete oxidation of the wastewater, which then lets you have both nitrate and ammonia in the plume, which then promotes the Animox reaction. So we found in our review that the sites that had Animox, both nitrate and ammonia in the plumes, were the sites with the lower water table positions.
that would be a question that would be quite indicative of your position. You moved to the beach. Do you have a septic system at your house?
Yeah, well, there is one in our backyard, and it's our back deck steps out onto a septic system drain field. However, it's no longer in operation. It was decommissioned about before we got there, about 15 years ago, but it's still there. And,
that's quite interesting. Would there be a distance? Let's say when you have a crowded city like mine, and we live in São Paulo, that wouldn't be recommended because the neighbors would be too close, or that's not a big problem.
I
know it's tricky, just to tease you, so you can.
septic system use requires I would say a fairly large lot size to make everything doable, and perhaps in crowded neighborhoods that's a less feasible option, and that's when communal sewer services certainly might be the way to go for sure.
Yeah, so exactly that was my point. So
yeah,
we can have for rural areas, those are very well suited then, right? That's the solution. It's cheap and it works, right?
Yeah. So definitely has a place, and it can do a great job in treating wastewater if it's in the right spot, in the right situation.
Well, I'm bugging you because I have a place, at the beach. We also have a septic system.
Scoop here, eh?
No, and I know it works. That's I'm bugging you, but it's been there and it's been safe for many years.
And you haven't tried to install.
We don't use quite often. Like we don't live there, right? That's another story.
You haven't tried to install a few piezometers into the water table to see what's going on down there?
That's the idea. That's the idea. Hydrogeologists having fun. That's what
yeah.
Very good.
Plumes are fun. Yeah.
All right. So just a final thing. We're doing this. I always ask the people that I'm being interviewed here, did you have fun doing your work? Because lots of people might start thinking, well, should I study that? Did you have fun? Do you recommend that?
I definitely had fun, yeah, throughout my career. And I never got bored, that's for sure. And I was always ready to come back the next year and sort out the next problem. There was always eureka moments coming along when you'd suddenly see some geochemistry that would reveal exactly what was going on. And we always look forward to the laboratory data coming back and hopefully a eureka moment to sort everything out. But no, it was always fun, and it was definitely a great experience going through that. Those investigations.
Do you still have a dog? I remember that you used to bring your dog to the field there at the Borden. Do you still have a dog?
Yes, and I had one here that jumped up beside me on the chair just before you got here. The same pointer breed, and yes,
really?
Still got the dog.
Oh, it's very good. I remember you and Bob Ingleton as well. You used to have what was that? That was a husky, and sometime I think he had a husky, I think.
Yeah, that was Lincoln, the big husky. Lincoln is no longer with us, but yeah, he's Bob's daughter Dana now has the big dog. And
oh, good.
Bob has got a cat.
Oh, he changed to a cat. That's good. All right, thank you very much, Will. Please, could you make your final comments, please? That was a great pleasure talking to you again.
I think I pretty much covered it, and thanks, Everton, for giving me the opportunity to get into the details here of septic system ins and outs. And thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. I hope your book will be a great success. You deserve it. It's a great job. Nice talking to you again. Take care.